welcome back to Elise Reads and Speaks. Today I am bringing you something a little different. So I have mentioned on my channel a few times that I am a speech language pathologist. I work with kids. I work for a pediatric private practice with kids in early intervention. Early intervention is technically until 3 years old. Most of the kids in my caseload are like 2 to 5, I would say, around there. So I decided that I am going to make a list of books with a bunch of different representation for the SLP. Some of them are adult books, some of them are middle grade, some of them are YA, and the representation will range anywhere from autism to dyslexia to, I don't know, stuttering, okay? There's just a bunch of different stuff out there that we all work with because the speech language pathology umbrella is big. So if you have no idea, I mean, if you're working with older people, you could work on swallowing or memory. If you're working with people my age, I mean, maybe they've had a TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury. If you're like me and you work with peds in early intervention, it's a lot of language delays and a lot of autism. So I decided I would just compile a list of 10 books. You can take this representation in any way that you want. Some of it I feel is very positive, so maybe it's something that you would be able to recommend to a family. Or if you come from a family that has one of these representations in your home, maybe it's something that you would want to read and just learn a little bit more about it or recommend it to your family member. So, okay, there is no particular order that these books are in. It was just really the order that they popped into my brain. So the first one that I'm going to start with is A Dragon, Bird, and the Fern by Laura Rucker. This is a recent book. Like, I believe that this came out in August 2021, so it's a very new release. I enjoyed this one because it represents dyslexia. This girl comes from one kingdom, one town, and she's moving to another one. They don't have the same language, so she has to learn another language. However, she's very, very nervous about learning a different language because she is dyslexic. Someone realizes, the tutor that's teaching her, realizes that she's dyslexic and kind of uses it to his advantage. He takes advantage of her not being able to read certain words on the page, gives her mistranslations for things, and I really like that it dealt with some self-advocacy in here because eventually she's like, enough. You are going to speak to me so that I learn this language because I learn more with auditory comprehension than I do from reading print on a page. And I liked that because I was just like, you know, that's what we need to be doing. This is what is called an accommodation in school speak. You know, if a kid has trouble reading and doesn't understand the words as they are written, but can do some auditory comprehension, a lot of times you'll see that with test accommodations, you know, must use a read aloud to take this test in X amount of time or something like that. Or sometimes they're given more time to complete a test because of their language needs. So I thought that this had some positive dyslexia representation. Not only the fact that there's a character with dyslexia in a YA fantasy book, but also because she had some of that self-advocacy in there. Like, she was figuring out how to advocate for herself, which is the most important part. Next on my list, I have Sadie by Courtney Summers. So the main girl in here has a stutter. The most interesting thing about this book, and if you have not read or listened to this book yet, I highly recommend the audiobook because it shows what stuttering is inside a person's head. So the interesting thing is that while she is thinking, while she's, you know, talking to herself, she does not have a stutter because people don't stutter in their brains through their stream of consciousness, you know? But as she's speaking to other people out loud and having conversations, that's where her stutter comes out. I just felt like that was really important for people that are not familiar with stutters to realize, like, just because somebody stutters does not mean they're slow. There's no hiccup in their brain. It's just something, you know, with motor planning that comes out, and it can come out for a variety of different reasons. And based on what Sadie has been through in her life, you know, perhaps there's a little traumatic event that possibly caused this stutter. You don't know. You don't get a direct answer, but it's implied. I just felt like, although that this is a very dark story, I will warn you for that, a dark story, kind of an open-ended, you don't know what happens to her kind of story, I thought that the stutter itself was portrayed well. Like, just as an SLP, listening to this book, I was like, yes, I feel like this is what people should know about people who stutter. The next book on my list is Song for a Whale by Lynn Kelly. Dude, I love this book. I think it was one of my top reads like 2 years ago whenever it came out. I did a whole video about how you could like this as much as I did, and I went into a lot of speechy things, so I'll leave that link down below if it's something you're interested in. This book follows a girl who is deaf. She goes to a normal hearing school. You know, it's very easy to kind of brush off or ignore people that are deaf in a typical setting just because they can't communicate well. Like, I remember reading this and my heart was breaking because the only person she could really speak to was her interpreter, because nobody else bothered to learn sign language. Nobody really looked to her for classroom discussion or anything like that. And it also makes you think, you know, what if something happened to the interpreter? What if he's sick for a day? What if he, you know, just can't make it that day? Her communication is cut off. She can't speak to anybody that she goes to school with. Like, very, very important stuff that happens in this book. But that's not even the main crux of the book. The reason it's called Song for a Whale is because this whale, Blue 55, speaks at a different frequency than other whales. So like, he is trying to communicate to these whales that cannot communicate back. Like, they can't hear him and they won't speak in the same frequency as him. So he's kind of out there on his own in the ocean, and she feels this special kindred to this whale. She was like, you know, I find it tough to communicate too, and I need to get this whale to see that we hear him and he can be heard and we can speak back to him. So she even enlists, you know, like the band to play at a specific frequency, or like include these notes that have specific frequencies that she'd be able to play underwater for this whale. Like, just talking about it makes me a little emotional. It was so great for a middle grade read, and it's all about communication. This was so freaking good. Okay, so from my middle grade read, I'm going completely different. I'm gonna recommend an adult book to you. This one is called The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. Let me be very clear. This is an adult book that has smut, okay? So like, don't recommend it to kids. Don't do it. Don't do it. So this one I particularly wasn't crazy about because that's not usually my jam. I don't like a lot of smutty books. However, I did like the representation here. So the main girl in here has autism, and she has decided that she is going to get help from an escort about having sex. You know, she wants to figure out what she likes, and she wants to make sure that whatever she does it right. She wants to practice. And I felt like it put autism in a good light because it shows that people on the spectrum can be of all different kinds of abilities, all right? There are probably people in your life right now that are on the spectrum and you have no clue because, one, they can mask it well, and two, like, they're not so socially low that they can't connect with other people. It might just be some, you know, awkward encounters or something like this. I like that this book took a regular girl about my age, I'm thinking like 30s, I think she was around there, and she wanted to do something for herself. Like, she decided that she was going to figure out more about her sexuality, and she wanted to do it on her own terms. So again, it's that advocacy thing that I really enjoy. Like, she was taking hold of her life, you know? And she wasn't letting other people call the shots for her, having her parents set her up with somebody else, even if she wasn't really into them. Like, she was being in control of what she wanted. I don't know, it was just the way that she was depicted, I felt like showed autism in a really positive light. So if there are some autistic adults in your life that could use some of that positive representation, I really do think it was in this book. Just warn them of the smut. There's some smutty smutness in this book. So staying on the autism train, if you have watched my channel for any amount of time, you will know how much I love this book. I love this graphic novel so much. Invisible Differences by Julie Dotchez. It's so good. It's about an autistic adult. So you'll see right here, it says a story of Asperger's, adulting, and living a life in full color. In the world that we're living in now, like, Asperger's isn't a term that's commonly used that much anymore. You're usually just saying autistic or on the spectrum. That's not to say Asperger's doesn't exist. It's just not really what we use. However, in this book, I did learn about autistic people in France and how in France they seem to be way behind everybody else in accepting autism and realizing that these people need accommodations. So not only is it educational about an autistic adult, it's educational about, you know, what the hell is going on in France. All right, let me show you something. So the reason that it's saying living a life in full color, this book starts out, she's got, you know, black and white, and as you flip through, more color starts being added to her life, which I think is awesome. It's showing that as she realizes that she has this diagnosis of autism, and she realizes what it means for her life and how, again, advocacy, she can start advocating for herself. It adds more color and definition to her life, and I think it's so beautiful. And I also like how some of the sensory things are portrayed in here. For example, there's one picture where the all these shoes are on the ground, and you can just imagine like what noise high heels make. And it has the words written all around it, like noise, 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 noise. And I felt like that was a good way to describe, you know, how it might be sensory overload for an autistic person, you know, if they're very stimulated by all the sounds that are going on around them. Like, again, they're just such great things in here. I really, really enjoyed it. I can't recommend this book enough. I'll probably talk about it on my channel many more times to come, and I'm not gonna apologize for it. The next book I'm gonna highlight is The First Time We Met by Jo Lovett. So this is a romance. However, it doesn't, the person that it's focused on does not have some sort of SLP need. She is an SLP, which I don't know about you. I have not seen SLPs in many books. Like, this is the only one that I can think of. And I'm like, there are a lot of us, okay? There's gotta be somebody else with this profession in some of the fiction that I read, okay? So not only that, like, I think it portrays in a good light what SLPs kind of do. So this guy that she ends up connecting with has a boy that stutters. So there is some stutter representation in here. And there's some teletherapy representation in here. And I just like to say, people write off teletherapy, but dude, it works. It works. You know, if your service coordinator or somebody is recommending to you teletherapy with an SLP, don't say, I want face-to-face. Dude, give it a chance because it works. So this girl is on a different continent than this guy, and he remembers after running into her at some point that she's an SLP, and he ends up reaching out to her because, you know, whatever SLP has been working with his son hasn't worked, and he still stutters, and he has very low self-esteem. So she has teletherapy sessions with his son to work on his stutter, and I just think that's so sweet. Again, it's not like the whole focus of the story, because the whole focus is the romance between this guy and this girl, but I just think that it had SLP representation and teletherapy. The next one I'll recommend is a very, very, very popular series, so you're probably aware of it. However, if you've never read it, you might not be aware of the dyslexia representation that is in Percy Jackson, all right? All the Percy Jackson books. I heard, I don't know if it's completely true, but I heard that Rick Riordan even started writing these stories because of his son that had dyslexia, and he wanted to portray it in a positive light, which, I mean, dude, we are all for. Rick Riordan is a wonderful human being for so many things. That's just one of them. So in this book, any demigod, any child of the god that's like half human, half god, demigods, they can't read regular English because their brains are wired for Greek, for Latin, okay? And I just think that's a lovely way to portray dyslexia, because you're like, it's not that I'm stupid or that I have a language disorder, it's that I'm a demigod and I can only read the Greek alphabet. Like, I think that's great. And I like a lot of the story does touch on that, you know, when they have difficulties reading something and working it out and figuring their brains around it, like, such great dyslexia representation. It's also very educational with the way that it portrays Greek mythology. You learn about a lot of the popular myths that you would learn about in grade school, because I know that I learned about them too, but also how kids with language disabilities or, you know, dyslexia shouldn't be written off because they're commonly seen as stupid, and they're not. And I like that this story kind of throws in your face, like, these kids aren't stupid, they're demigods. Like, such a great series. The next series that I'll recommend is The Dark Artifices by Cassandra Clare. So if you are out of the Shadowhunter world and you don't understand the Shadowhunter books, oh man, you can't just plunge right into this series. I'll tell you that right now. don't start with this one because you'll be very, very confused. This is like the third series in the Shadowhunter world that you should read. It's like Mortal Instruments, then the Infernal Devices, and then the Dark Artifices. However, a character with autism is not introduced until the Dark Artifices. And it really hits on him a lot and how his autism kind of like shapes his decisions. But I felt that it put it in a positive way because this guy is a shadow hunter. Like, he can hunt demons just like the rest of the shadow hunter clan, and his autism ends up being like a positive thing to add to the mix. Like, I really enjoyed how she took autism and didn't make it a disability. She made it an advantage, which I thought was very positive representation. So if you're at all interested in the shadow hunter realm, I would suggest these books because there's a lot of different type of representation in them. But before you get to this one, like, you gotta read the others. I just think you should know that there is a crucial character in this series, The Dark Artifices, that has autism, and it's done well. The next book I'm recommending is a very recent read. I just finished reading it this week and I was very pleasantly surprised by it. It is not going to be released until January 2022, so you've got some time before you can buy it, but you should put it on your radar if you're interested in a book that has an articulation disorder representation. Like, you don't see that often. This book is called The Way I Say It by Nancy Tandon. This is a middle grade read, and the main boy in here has a specific sound disorder with R. We all know how frustrating working on R can be. For those of you that don't know, there are so many different forms of R, like initial, medial, final, R, ear, or, our, air. Oh man, there's a lot. And like, kids that have to work on R, sometimes they'll get one form and can't get the rest. Sometimes they'll have half and can't get the rest. Sometimes they're not what's called stimulable at all. And you're like, what do I do? Like, if you ask any SLP, working on R is one of the most stressful things. And she focuses on that in this book. And I looked her up afterwards, and she said she was a former certified speech language pathologist, so that makes me think that she's not practicing anymore. But she clearly has a lot of experience with it, because I felt like, oh yeah, somebody is speaking to us SLPs in the world because R, man, R, we all hate working on R. So that's not the only thing that's in here. So in this story, yes, he has an R articulation disorder, and he's made fun of by the other kids in school, you know, with his baby talk, because unfortunately his name is Rory. And he pronounces his own name, Wowie. And it's like, oh gosh, you don't even realize how difficult that must be. Like, if you can't say your own name, or if you do say your name and people make fun of you the second that your name comes out loud, it's really heartbreaking. And middle schoolers really suck. They're really mean. And I thought that was portrayed very well in here, because I have met those mean kids that will pick on anyone for anything. So I digress. One of these mean kids used to be a friend of his, and unfortunately got with the cool kids and made fun of him as well, so they stopped being friends. But a bike accident warps this kid's brain a little bit because he has a traumatic brain injury. So the thing that I also liked in here is that it shows that SLPs don't just work on speech. Like, this boy, Rory, even said at one point, you know, why do you need to work with Brent? His speech is fine. And the SLP was like, you know, that's not the only thing that SLPs work on. You know, organization, planning, like learning to communicate with other people, that is language. And that's something that's under our umbrella. That I was like, that's good too. Like, I even think of, you know, doing my externships at a hospital, and you walk in and say you're from speech, and people are like, there's nothing wrong with my speech. I'm like, okay. We do so much, okay? You have a problem and it's under our umbrella, and I don't want to explain it every single time. But I just liked how there were two different boys in here that needed the SLP's help, and it was two different types of help. Like, one of them needed the articulation therapy. Another one needed just therapy with like conversation, working on pragmatic language, because now his traumatic brain injury kind of forced him to lose those inhibitions, you know, him loudly standing up and saying that I have to pee, like learning those pragmatic skills of like, hey, that's not how we do things. I thought there was some really great stuff in here. oh man, I'm talking about this book a lot, but I'm also talking about it a lot because it is a middle grade read. It has some great representation here for SLPs, articulation disorders, traumatic brain injuries, and it can apply to a lot of different things in school, like bullying, having a core group of friends, surrounding yourself with people that support you and accept you just as you are. Like there was some really great stuff in here. So those are the 10 books that I'm recommending to you. However, I do have one honorable mention. So I am going to mention Lady Smoke by Laura Sebastian. The reason I'm mentioning this one, it is the second book in a series, so don't start with this one. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because there is a character in here that I strongly suspected had autism. He was a captain or a general, and just his quirks that were mentioned, how he liked things a specific way, how he needed to have specific items around him or by him that he could hold. It wasn't like OCD. It almost seemed like it was being described as this character had autism without coming out right and saying it. And honestly, maybe in this fantasy world, like that word doesn't even exist. I don't know. And I couldn't see that any interviews or anything that she said that this character had autism. But I really, with my line of work, I got that strong suspicion, and I felt like it was good representation because this guy was well respected. And I felt like people looked up to him because he was such a good commander of deciding, to go to war, and this is where that person should be. This is where this, battalion should be over there. Like, I felt like it took the brain of an autistic person and used it in a profession that could kind of highlight how that would be an advantage, So I thought it was good representation. I say representation, but again, like, it never comes outright and says that he has autism, so I'm not sure, but I suspect. And if you read this book and you're familiar with autism, I would really like to know what you think. Like, do you agree with me or do you disagree? Like, what do you think? What do you think? Okay, so those are my list of books that I would recommend for the SLPs out there in the world. Plus, again, if you have any of these disorders and you're looking for your own representation, if you have a family member or friend that is in need of this type of representation, give one of these books a try. I hope to do another video like this in the future when I read more books and find books with other language and speechy stuff that I could compile into another list. I will let you know when that happens. But as of right now, that's all I've got for today. Thank you for tuning in to Elise Reads and Speaks, and I will catch you next time, guys. Bye!